Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Give Local workshop. My name is Mary. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the pleasure of serving as our Philanthropy and Communications Officer here at the Foundation. Also want to take a moment to give a shout out to my colleagues in attendance, Melissa Roska and Janice, I think, is just joining us by audio. As you all know, Give Local South Puget Sound is an initiative of the Community Foundation and encourages community philanthropy, increases support for causes people in our region care about, and boosts nonprofit visibility. Since 2017, our communities have raised $2.9 million through this campaign, and we expect 2023 to be yet another banner year with over 100 nonprofits already registered. Before I turn the mic over to today's presenter, I want to take a moment to go over some housekeeping. Today's workshop is being recorded and closed captioning is provided. We expect to share the slides as well as the recording on our website within the week for everyone to enjoy. And being in community is all about interacting with one another. So we ask that you please use the chat on Zoom to let us know if you have any questions. Our team is monitoring the chat, and Daisha will let us know when she's ready to take any questions. For additional nonprofit Give Local support, we ask that you please get in touch with Melissa. We will share their email as well as a link where you can schedule appointments with them. All right, that's enough of all the boring stuff. So let's just go on with our presentation. And with storytelling at the heart of Give Local, we're excited to welcome Daisha Versaw to the virtual stage this morning. She's a local storytelling and strategy consultant who is a former colleague and longtime friend of Give Local and the Community Foundation. And with that, I'll just pass the mic off. Daisha, take it away.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you everyone for being here. I want to start by inviting you all to take a breath, and we're going to talk about why this part is important in just a little bit. So let's take a big breath in and out. And I'm going to invite you to keep breathing intentionally for the next couple of minutes. And as you do so, I just want to invite you to pause and notice you. I don't know if you're all in the same area as me. The rains are back. It's early morning, midweek. Maybe there's some tiredness. Maybe there's some excitement, some energy for the day ahead. I want you to notice what you're bringing into the room today, the Zoom room. And then I want you to also notice that you're not here alone. So looking around the screen at these faces and these names, I'm noticing that everyone who is here is showing up in some way to make this community that I love better, working on something that you care about, working on connecting people, inspiring people, and bringing people into the work of community. And so in some ways, we're all here today with our people. And I'm really glad to be part of this. And then I want you to notice one more thing, and I'm going to ask you to add it to the chat. I want you to notice something that you're grateful for this morning. And while you think of that, and while you add that to the chat, I'm going to go ahead and actually introduce myself. So my name is Daisha, as Mary said. And my gratitude today is to be here with all of you. So storytelling is one of my favorite topics. And so anytime people are up for coming and exploring that topic with me, that makes me really happy and really grateful. And I'm grateful to the foundation for bringing me back. I know some of you from my time on staff there, and Give Local has always been one of my favorite initiatives that the Community Foundation has. I love the way that it lifts up and highlights community. And so combining storytelling and Give Local and being with all of you is my gratitude for today. A tiny bit about my background and what I bring. I have worked in social change or nonprofits for 16, almost 17 years now. And I have worked in everything from food systems to technology to philanthropy, to immigration, and worn a lot of different hats over that time. So everything from a volunteer to a board member to nonprofit staff, both on the program side and on the fundraising and development side, to what I'm doing now, working as a story and strategy consultant I work with a lot of different organizations to support the work that they do. And regardless of which area I'm working in or which hat I'm wearing, story has always been a really important tool to create connection, to inspire and motivate people, to attract supporters and friends into the work that we're doing, to drive the mission forward, to resource the work. So it's a really powerful tool. And the coolest thing to me about story is it is part of our wiring as humans. And so it's something that we can all do. We're all storytellers. And we can always get better. We can find more resources, more tools. We can cultivate and nurture that trait in ourselves so that we can use our stories more effectively. I'm going to go over the agenda in just a second, but as I do that, check out the chat because there's some really cool gratitudes in there, and I think it's fun to see where people are coming from just as a start. So I'm going to go into the agenda. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking so that I can share my screen. Okay. All right. This is what we're going to go over today. I packed probably too much in, so some of this we might slide over it very quickly, but as Mary said, we're going to get these slides out to you so that you can sit with them, dive deeper into them. You don't need to take notes. You'll get all of this in your inbox soon. We're going to start with just a really quick look at a little bit of brain science. We're going to talk about Give Local superpower and how we can tap into it with our Give Local stories. We're going to dig into our storytelling toolbox. And if you took the Fundraising for Humans workshop with me a couple of years ago, you might recognize some of these. We glanced over all of them before, and I'm bringing them back so that we can really get into them and try them out and practice with them today. So this part will be very interactive. We're going to talk a bit about audience and how to connect our stories with meaning. We're going to go over some storytelling ethics and the shape of stories. And then we're going to follow up with a little bit of homework, especially for those of you who are planning on coming back for part 2. And we'll get into what part 2 is going to look like and all of that at the end. And then I think I'm not going to keep too close of an eye on the chat as I go. I'm thinking maybe we'll save questions for the end, but save them by putting them in the chat just so you don't lose the question, and we can go back to those at the end. All right, so brain science. The only reason I'm sharing this with you is because I think it's important to know as storytellers that the brains of our audiences are affected by our stories. And when we know a little bit about how people's brains are affected by storytelling, it can help us to affect people more intentionally, to have the effect that we want. So when humans encounter a good story, our brains love that. Our brains are just firing. All of our brain cells, our little neurons are just going off. And a couple of cool things can happen. Our brains will start to sync or mirror or map with a couple of things. We might map with the content of a story, and we can also map with the emotions of the storyteller. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that so that it makes sense to you. Imagine that you're watching a scary movie and you are an intelligent person. You know that this is a movie. It's not real and you're not in it. And yet you might be shrinking back, squirming down in your seat, covering your eyes. Your heart rate might be elevated because your brain is feeling like you're having that experience that's unfolding on screen, right? This can happen with a sad story as well. You hear or read something sad that's happened to someone, you might tear up. You might have your heart broken a little bit. You might feel the thrill of an adventure story. You might kind of fall in love in the middle of a love story. So that's mapping onto the content of a story. Another thing that our brains can do, though, is we can also map onto the emotional state of the person telling the story. So this happens when you have a friend who has just had something egregious happen to them and they're so upset and they're telling you and you are mad for them. You start to kind of mirror their emotions. Or someone has just gone through something horrible and heartbreaking and you're going to feel that too. If someone's really jazzed up or excited about something when they come into telling a story, you can map onto that as well. Apologies for how busy this next slide is. We're not going to go into it in detail, but I want to share it with you because one thing I really want to stress is that different storytelling elements, different things that we put into our stories affect people's brains in different ways. And so knowing that including these things in your stories is going to have these different effects on your audience. And again, you're going to get this slide so you can kind of dig into it, learn more about it. But the important takeaway of this is that when you understand as a storyteller how different storytelling elements can affect the brain of your audience, you're able to use them more intentionally for the effect that you want. And so when you're dealing with a hard story and maybe you have some bad news to share, knowing how this can affect your audience can help you handle that story with more care and more empathy, right? And knowing that having some kind of cause and effect, some kind of change in your story is going to get people's attention, that can give you some ideas of where you might want to include that element in your story. But the big takeaway here really is just that when you start to understand how different storytelling elements have different effects on the brain, or they can, you're able to use them to have a more intentional effect with your stories. One of the cool things about Give Local is you've got some cool effects kind of baked right into being part of this campaign. So I chose this background slide for those of you who can see it intentionally because it reminded me of these quilts that my grandma used to make. And these quilts remind me of how things come together with Give Local. So each of your organizations is made up of all kinds of different stories. You've got all kinds of stories that demonstrate the work you do, all kinds of things that are happening within your organizations. And each of your organizations is connecting those stories together into this bigger overarching story of your work, your broader work, and your whole organization. The cool thing that Give Local does is it takes all of those big overarching stories of each organization and it connects them together into this story of collective hope and abundance and a community that is showing up to care for each other. And so right away, you've got a lot of empathy baked in. You've got a lot of joy baked in. You've got a lot of connection baked in. And hopefully a whole lot of making a difference kind of baked into this bigger story of Give Local. So what Give Local does is by highlighting and lifting up and bringing together all of the ways that people are making a difference here where we live, it gives all of us an opportunity to kind of join into that bigger community story of collective hope and abundance. And here's some ideas for how you can tap into that big collective power of Give Local. Suggestions and ideas. Going beyond telling people what you do and really highlighting the difference that you're making and why it matters to our community is going to tap into that bigger story of Give Local. Highlighting togetherness, the ways that people are coming together, maybe the way that your organization is coming together with another organization that's part of Give Local. And maybe it's as simple as just going on to your social media, finding some cool work that another organization is doing and sharing it with your followers. Humanizing the work that you're doing. Something that's amazing about Give Local is the people who are doing this work that you're telling the stories of through Give Local. These are all like neighbors and friends and the people that we pass on the street in this community because this is such a local effort. And so really lifting up the people who are part of this cool stuff that you're doing is a way to tap into that bigger community story. And then also going beyond educating people, but really connecting with their values. What do people here care about? What do you know about your audience and why they might be showing up on this platform? And we're going to practice this a little bit with a short breakout room. And we're jumping now into our storytelling toolbox. And this tool that we're going to pull out and we're going to try out in a short breakout room, we're going to divide either into 2s or 3s. Melissa's going to help me out with that math. Is called a mission moment. That's what I call it. You call it whatever you want to. But what it is it's taking the time to sit and reflect on a moment in your nonprofit work, whatever your organization is up to, that you've witnessed that made you stop and think, this is what it's all about. And this is a chance to practice tapping into that storytelling power of Give Local by practicing going beyond telling people what you do and talking about that difference and why it matters to our community. Because why it matters to you is going to reflect why it matters to other people who share your values and your dreams for this community. And so this is also, we're going to do it in the breakout room, but you can take it with you. You can do it on your own, sit down and write this out. And you can also do it generatively with your team, where you sit down with someone that you work with, a colleague or a fellow volunteer, and share these stories with each other. And what they can do is, first of all, it's just an uplifting exercise, but it also can become a story seed or a kernel that can help you develop a bigger story that you can share with an external audience. So, was everyone able to think of a story to share? Yeah, I see some head nods. All right. Well, I encourage you to take that tool with you and use it with your team sometime. It can be really fun and uplifting. I'm going to go back to screen sharing, and we're going to look at another tool that is maybe, I don't know, it's not as fun, but it's a good one. All right. So another tool that I just wanted to share with you, some of you probably have this or something like it already in your organizations. And if you don't, it's a good one to have. So this is a tool that a lot of nonprofits use called a case statement. And what a case statement is it is a 1 to 2 pager that is kind of a baseline for some of your nonprofit storytelling. And the reason it's a useful tool is that it's a document that can answer a lot of questions that people might have about your work. And so you can use it to build out marketing, you can use it to build out grant applications, and just kind of having the tool in your files can be something really helpful to build different stories on in different contexts. So on the left-hand side of this table are the elements of a case statement. And what goes into a case statement is your mission, vision, your values, if you have them. And this is put in there because it answers the question of why your organization exists. You might also have some of your goals in a case statement. And so that would be, what do you do? We're ending hunger. We are working to create lifelong learners. We're adding art to public spaces. These are the things that we're doing. You want to have some information there about how your organization goes about its work. Are you creating community gardens, and that's how you're addressing hunger? Or are you distributing food directly to people? Are you giving out stipends to artists or creating a space for them to come together and actually do their work and be creative? Are you doing a tutoring program for these lifelong learners? Or are you making sure that kids have access to books? So those can be some of your objectives. You want to have something in there about your history. How long have you been around? How long has your organization been doing the work? How have you evolved? What are you becoming? Something in there about who is doing the work. That's always important. And then sometimes that does change. And so a case statement is kind of a living document that can be updated as more things happen, both with people, with goals, with whatever updates you have. And then you want to have your budget, especially when you're talking to donors or to funders. It really helps people to understand what is the scope of the resource need to make this work possible and to make it happen. And the reason I'm bringing up a case statement in a storytelling workshop is, first of all, it is a story in itself, but also it can help you kind of figure out what some different smaller stories are that support the different elements of the work that you do. So a case statement does a really good job of being like a big umbrella story for your organization. And then under that umbrella, supporting each of these elements, you can start to think of different examples of stories that kind of illuminate or support each element. And so under your why, you might have some purpose and identity stories. And so maybe something similar to that mission moment that you shared with each other in the breakout room. You might have some stories about how you're making a difference connected to your goals, how you're learning and growing and evolving connected to your objectives. Origin and transition stories. This is where we started and who started it and why they did that and what problem they were trying to solve can go into supporting and illuminating your history. And team highlights and meaning team in a really inclusive way, that it's your staff and it's your board and it's also your volunteers. It can be your donors. It can be the people who are taking part in your programs. All of those people can be highlighted in different ways under people. And then stories about resources and needs, maybe a story of a time when your work was resourced and the difference that it made, or maybe a story about when your work fell short of being resourced and how you had to adapt and work through that struggle. So on the left-hand side, all of those different kinds of stories are ideas for story buckets that you can, or a story library. So you can kind of collect and catalog and keep these stories and pull them out when you need them. And a time like Give Local can be a really good time to pull out some of these stories and share them with the community. Something I think people, including myself, forget sometimes with stories is stories are kind of like outfits. We can wear them more than once. We can use the same story in different ways. We can share it more than one time. And so sometimes having some of these core stories available to you that you can just plug in at different times, people aren't going to remember, oh, you shared that 9 months ago, you can't share it again, because that's just not how our brains work. Like, we got a lot going on. And so by building up a good library of stories, you've got a lot that you can share in different contexts and reuse and reshape again and again. And one of these kinds of stories, and this is another exercise, is what I call a flash story. You can also call it an elevator pitch. It's just a short story that puts together what your organization does in a really brief way. And I like this particular tool, this exercise, because it allows you to kind of like fill in the blanks, like a little bit of Mad Libs, and it takes some of the pressure off for how you structure it. And what I would like us to do now is I would love for people to take a minute and actually do this. Like, let's maybe do 3 minutes. So we don't want to overthink this one. We want to keep it pretty short. And maybe let's even write down, if you're comfortable sharing in the chat, fill out these blanks, or you can just jot it down on a piece of paper or in your computer that you're on. Feel free to go off camera for this part if you want to. And I'm just going to give you a minute or a couple of minutes to practice with this one. And I'll go ahead and leave it up on the screen while you do that, but I'm going to not talk just to give you a chance to concentrate. Let's go ahead and give this one a try. Whoops, sorry about that. I'll just take like 1 more minute to work on this. Again, it's not an overthinking one. It's just a stretching exercise. Does anyone have one that they want to share? Was anyone able to come up with one that quickly? It can be hard to do it in that short. Go ahead, Danny. Although you are on mute.
Maybe I'll just stick it in the chat.
Yeah, chat is good. If anyone wants to share one in the chat, that would be great, just to see like what people are coming up with. Let's see. Oh yeah, so Kim's got one in the chat. Lene's got one in the chat. And totally, this is all ad lib. Yeah, these are great. Very short, but you put a lot in there. And it tells a story. It's a quick story. And it's cool to see too, for Wild Grief too, to just think about how like each of us approaches our work a little bit differently with slightly different words. And we're telling the same story. So thank you. Thank you everyone for doing that. And thank you for the people who shared. Another thing I'll just add quickly before we move on, I want to get into audience and ethics and then wrap up with some homework in the next 20 minutes. But one thing that I will add with this one is it can be really helpful if you need to update your mission statement. It can be a helpful stretching exercise for that. If you need to get your team aligned around purpose, it can be a really helpful exercise for that. So there's a lot of uses of this one. And then of course, like just being able to, when you go out in the community and you're introducing yourself to someone and they ask, what do you do? What does your organization do? Being able to share something like this very quickly that packs a lot in about who and why and the difference that you're trying to make, it can be a really helpful story tool to just have on hand. And again, this one will go out to you to keep if you enjoy using it. I'm stalling because I lost my button to change the slides. Hang on a second. All right. Another thing that matters when it comes to storytelling is who are you talking to? Audience is a really important part of storytelling, especially when we're wanting to tell meaningful stories. A cool thing about Give Local is you kind of have an audience built in. It's going to be the people who already support you or the people who are coming to the Give Local platform and looking around and exploring new nonprofits. And so you know a few things about this audience already. The quote at the bottom here in blue is one of my favorite quotes to use when I'm thinking of audience. And this is a quote from Meg Wheatley. She also goes by Margaret J. Wheatley. And this is from a book that she wrote called Turning to Each Other. And she says, there is no greater power than a community discovering what it cares about. Ask what is possible, not what's wrong. Keep asking. Notice what you care about. Assume that many others share your dreams. And so approaching audience with Give Local, your audience is your supporters. It's people coming to the Give Local platform. And most importantly, it is people who care about the same things that you do. So they're caring about work that's happening locally. That's why they're part of Give Local. And so you automatically have that value in common: community, local, being here, this place, the people who live here. And under that bigger, because that's a lot of people and not everyone in that is going to be your audience, it's the people who care about the same stuff that you do. It's the people who share your dreams for this community, who have some hopes in common for what our community could look like, and some hopes in common for this world that you're being part of bringing about through the work that you do and the changes that you're working on making. And so that can help you figure out who your audience is, so I'm going to go back a second, not just figure out who your audience is, but be able to imagine them, be able to imagine your ideal audience, which will help you figure out how to craft your stories and then also how to attach your stories to meaning. So in the work that we do in this sector, truth and facts are important. They're also not what makes stories powerful all the time. Meaning is what's going to make our stories powerful. So the most powerful stories that we can share are stories that people are going to find meaningful. And you can think of connecting stories to meaning as kind of building a triangle or a three-leaf clover, if you like a more organic picture. But you're trying to connect this audience, your audience that you have to work with the right message that connects to the right story. And the cool thing about building this triangle of meaning is that you can start wherever you have the most clarity. So sometimes we just have a message and we start there. Sometimes we know our audience, it's these people through Give Local, and we've got to think of the story and the meaning that we want to convey to them, the story and the message. And sometimes we have a story that we just know there's something there. We know it's really compelling and we need to start there. And so this slide is way too busy, but again, you're going to get it by email. So you don't have to pull it all off the screen, but you can take your starting point wherever you have the most clarity in that triangle of story, message, and audience. And you can ask yourself some questions about what your starting point is to help you figure out how to connect it to the other 2 points. So knowing who your audience is and thinking about what do they care about and how do I want to affect them? And what is the message that they need to hear and the story that's going to really be able to convey that to them can be one place to start. Having that compelling story and thinking about, okay, why is this story compelling to me? What is the purpose of it? What underlying truth does it tap into? And who is it for? can be another place where you can start. And then sometimes your organization has a message. Dental hygiene is important. What are some stories about that? Who is the audience that is important for? It's important to have cross-generational friendships. And you know that's your message. And so you can think about, where have you observed these cross-generational friendships playing out in the community? And that's your story. And then from there, who's your audience? Who needs to hear this? People across generations, different generations need to hear that. And so this can just be a helpful thing of like figuring out where to start. You're thinking about, how do I build this triangle? This is maybe the most important slide, and I'm going to send you some additional resources to go along with this, because we can't do it justice in the time that we have together. But I want to bring it up because I think our sector as nonprofits kind of have a rough track record with telling ethical stories, telling stories that honor the humanity of the people that we're working with, and that honor our own humanity and uphold our values. In the email that we'll send out, I don't actually use this slide necessarily. I translate these ideas into questions that I ask myself about my stories, and I'll send you those questions as a resource as well. We want to make sure when we're telling our stories that we're avoiding harmful stereotypes. A trope is another way of thinking of stereotypes, and extractive practices. So we don't want to be leveraging someone else's trauma to raise money for our organization, because that's going to ultimately cause more harm than good. We don't want to be putting blame for something that's broken on an individual's shoulders when it's a systemic thing, when it's bigger than them. And so there's so many ways that we can cause harm when we approach our storytelling thoughtlessly. And these ideas and the questions that I'll send you are just tools to help you tell stories more thoughtfully. I can't tell you what ethical storytelling looks like necessarily for you and your context and your organization, because I don't have all the details that you do, but I can give you these ideas and these questions to do your own reflection as you go through stories. So you want to be thinking about, okay, what's a way that this could cause harm? Am I doing anything that could harm the person whose story I'm telling, or my community? Can I add to an imbalance of power that is not lined up with who I am and what I care about? You can think about who you're centering, and it's not necessarily that any one of these is the wrong answer, but you want to be aware of who you're centering and why. Am I centering my organization? Am I centering my donors? Or am I telling a bigger story about my community? I would say when I first started nonprofit storytelling, it was all organizational centric. Here's a problem, and here's how we came along and we fixed it. And we've shifted, and we started to think, who's our audience? It's often donors. And so here's a problem, and here's how you can come along and fix it, donor. And so we added that layer. And then we're being challenged, especially through some groups like community-centric fundraising, to be like, who's all involved in fixing this problem? And how are we doing this together? And so there's community-centered ways that we can tell stories. We want to make sure that our stories align with and uphold our values. We can focus on assets or deficits. We can focus on saving and fixing. Or we can talk about interdependence and community, that this tutoring program is not just successful because of a donor or because of our organization, but because of the kid who is showing up and investing time in learning and growing, and the volunteer that is showing up and supporting that kid on that journey, and the kid's parent or caring adult who is making sure that they have transportation to get to that tutoring session. And so you can craft these bigger stories that pull more people in and honor all of these different contributions. We can zoom out and make sure that we're not focusing in on individuals when really we're talking about something that's a policy issue or something systemic. So here's somebody who's lost their home would be an example of what is known as episodic storytelling. Thematic might be, here's what's going on with housing and all of the many challenges that combine to create situations where people are losing homes. And then finally, just making sure that you have permission to share this story, and that you don't take for granted that permission is indefinite, right? So, and this can really be supported by having good, strong, healthy relationships with the people that you're working with, so that you can kind of continue to make sure that you are sharing the story in a way that is that the person who it belongs to is okay with. And so continuing to make sure you've got permission to share stories. And then if you're going to share them again in a different way, go back and ask permission again. That can be a really good way to honor the people whose stories we're sharing. And again, I will send you more resources because that was not enough time on this topic. And we are going to skip this one, but I included this little video. It's very outdated if you do go look it up and want to look at it later. The thing I will say about this, and the reason I wanted to include it, but we're just going to jump into a story shape, is just to show you that stories can have different shapes. So how close or how far away are we in this story from the world that we want, from the where are we at in time? And so stories have a flow. They have rises and they have falls. And we're going to look at the shape that is my favorite one to use. I use this all the time. I found it to be really helpful for structuring and organizing my ideas. I did not fully invent it. I adapted it from a TED Talk by a woman named Nancy Duarte, which again, I can include in the notes that we send out. And her TED Talk is about speeches, but there's some really good stuff in there about story that you can adapt and you can use. And the reason I like this story is it helps you create a really compelling story that invites people into your work. And so this is how the N-shaped story goes. When you tell a story in this way, you start low, the very bottom left-hand side of that N, and you share what the problem or situation is that your organization wants to change. So maybe thinking of cross-generational friendships. We've become more isolated from each other. We're living in different homes. Our culture doesn't support people of different generations coming together. Start there. And why does that matter? It's creating loneliness. It's cutting us off from the wisdom of our elders, whatever it is that your organization sees in the world that you think that's not right. We want to do something about that. And then go high. Here's some solutions. Here's our theory of change, why we are approaching it in this way and how it's going to make things better. So we're going to connect young people and elders so that they can enjoy each other's energy and each other's wisdom and start to build some affection that's going to change our community in this way. If you stop your story there, there's nowhere for your audience to go. Like, okay, great. Like, thank you for solving that problem. I'm going to go find somebody where like I'm actually needed and I can be part of something. So you want to drop back down and you want to share what are the barriers that are still in the way. Maybe there's some stigma around the work that you're doing. Maybe there's some resources that you need, some volunteer time, some financial capital to move this forward. And so you want to drop down and say, we're not there yet because we still have this problem. And here's some of the barriers that are standing in the way. We need people to put some pressure on our policymakers, whatever it is that you are inviting your audience into. And then you want to go up and you want to start high again with here's what's possible together. But we can pull this work off. And we want you to be a part of it. And that's where it is. That's where the invitation ends. And that's what makes the story compelling. And I'm going to give you a chance to try this in the homework. But I'm actually going to skip ahead because the homework's a lot, isn't it? I give like a little hint of how much homework there is. It's not all of it. Those are just like a bunch of ideas. The N-shaped story is one thing, one option that you can try for your homework. And here's what the homework is. When you registered for this, you have the opportunity, and I saw a lot of people did sign up and not everybody did. You can still have a chance to sign up for that. Registration is still open to come back for part 2. And the idea for part 2 is to break us up into smaller groups where you can actually try practicing one thing that you learned today, something that felt like, oh, I can maybe like try this out and practice it in my Give Local storytelling. and then bring it back to a smaller group where we can do some peer kind of feedback and support on making those stories better. And so you'll have an actual chance to workshop your own story, whatever it is that you're working on and coming up with. And I will be there. I think some Community Foundation staff might be there. And then mostly your peers who are also doing Give Local will be there to support you in your learning. So that's what the follow-up sessions are. And now I am going to duck back to this homework assignment. It is not to do, it is not to do all of these things. It is to pick what feels manageable, maybe just one thing, and try out one thing that you learned today and bring it back to us. And if you don't want to do part 2, that's totally fine. You can just try out one thing that you learned today and maybe let me know how it goes. Mary will be sharing my contact information with you all. So, with that, I'm actually going to stop my share because apparently I can't handle the clicker. And we do have a couple of minutes if people have questions, if I missed something in the chat. And then, we'll be sending out contact information for follow-up questions and stuff too. I'm around and here to support you in your work. So that is it. Does anybody have anything they want to say or add or ask in the last few minutes? And I do have a few more minutes to stick around, but I know people are busy, so.
I would just ask one thing, is kind of like some tip or trick to get past the fear of interviewing clients, in particular, the fear of getting it wrong or doing something wrong. Like, I think we shy away, we can tell stories in different ways, but, a client's story or experience is the most important thing, but we really shy away from it just because it's just so hard to feel like you're going to do it right, or that, just keeping the ongoing permissions and stuff like that. Tips for just getting going and feeling confident enough to try it. My thought was, I have a number of friends who are clients that I've helped out over the years and we've become close. And I thought maybe, I don't know if that's cheating to pick someone who I have a regular relationship with, who's also a food bank client, and start with them, because I don't have to, I wouldn't learn how to do it the other way by talking to them because they're friends. So I don't know if that's kind of cheating.
I don't think it's cheating at all. And relationship and trust is a really good basis for storytelling ethics. And so if you even want to chat with them about, what do you think about having these stories shared as someone who is really close to this issue? And be guided by the people who you're in relationship with. I think trust and relationships has got to be the basis of what we do. And being thoughtful and asking for explicit permission to share these stories, asking people how they want their stories to be told, making sure that they know with that potential power imbalance that they're under no obligation to do this, right? And so going into it with that humility, with that listening, with that trust, with that relationship, I think is a really good place to start with getting over that fear.
Okay. Thank you.
And maybe some of that fear is justified too, right? We want to have some pause. We don't want to just charge in.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask, in the ethics, if you could talk more about what ongoing consent looks like. And for context, at Wild Grief, especially if we're interviewing participants shortly after they've come through our program, a lot of times they're so relieved to be able to talk about their experience that they, in the moment, may want to share details that we have to discern, like, this could cause harm to put this out there. So we want to err on the side of protecting our clients and also recognize that their consent could potentially evolve over time. So what does ongoing consent look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think a lot of it has to do with staying in relationships. So hopefully being able to stay connected. It looks like checking back in and saying, having that relationship again with the people who have come through your program. And so being able to, hey, we want to share this story again, and we want to make sure that you're still okay with it. It can be as simple as that. It can be even just maybe just putting your own kind of expiration date on things for like, here's when we're either going to go back and if we're still in relationship with this person, say, hey, where are you at with this? Is there anything you'd like us to change? Would you like us to stop sharing it and shift? And see what they say, but kind of having your own idea of like, what's the time frame for like this person going through seasons. And I think even just the way that you're asking the question shows me that you're thinking about that you're recognizing that people go through those seasons of grief and healing. And so, yeah, I think it's as simple as checking back in. And if you've lost touch and you can't check back in and you don't have that relationship anymore, then it becomes really hard to practice ongoing consent. And I think there's other things that we can do. We can remove details so that nobody can be identifiable, or there's some other things like that. But I think the best way is to have explicit permission and stay in relationship the best you can. I know that's hard sometimes in the work that we do because people leave. Did that kind of answer the question? It's not the answer, right? It's not. I feel like we need to do a workshop on storytelling ethics and get somebody who's so much smarter than me to do it, because it is hard to grapple with. It really is. Anyone
Other
else?
questions?
Well, I hope to see some of you in the follow-ups in part 2 and be in a little bit of a smaller group where we can really get into the specifics of what you're working on and where you are feeling like you need some support for Give Local. So if you haven't signed up, I would love for you to do that. And if not, feel free to follow up in other ways too. All right. I think that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.